One thing is sure, a great change of our psychological attitude is imminent. That is certain.
Why?
Because we need more. We need more psychology. We need more understanding of human nature, because the only real danger that exists is man himself. He is the great danger, and we are pitifully unaware of it. We know nothing of man, far too little. His psyche should be studied, because we are the origin of all coming evil.
Have you ever felt like something inside you is holding you back, sabotaging your own actions? What if I told you there's a hidden side of your personality lurking in the shadows, influencing your every thought? This hidden side is what Carl Jung calls the shadow. The shadow is a part of our unconscious mind that contains all the aspects of ourselves we reject or deny, including repressed desires, instincts, weaknesses, and parts of our personality. These hidden traits influence our behavior and emotions in ways we often fail to realize. But what is the shadow really? How can we recognize it? And most importantly, how can we control it? The shadow, the dark side of the human psyche, a modern spirituality production. Enjoy watching. Jung tells us in his collection of works, Psychology and Religion, everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. If an inferiority is conscious, there is always a chance to correct it. Furthermore, it is constantly in contact with other interests, so it is continually subject to modification. But if it is repressed and isolated from consciousness, it is never corrected. Carl Jung introduced the concept of the shadow in psychology as a fundamental part of the personal unconscious. The shadow contains the inferiorities that everyone possesses but prefers not to acknowledge. It is shaped by social norms, personal experiences, and repression. From a young age, we learn which behaviors, thoughts, and emotions are unacceptable to our family and society, pushing these traits into our unconscious mind. For example, a child told that anger is unacceptable might repress their anger, making it part of their shadow. While the shadow is often perceived as negative, it can also be positive. It holds various qualities, strengths, and potentials which, if left unexplored, leave us in a state of personality impoverishment, creating unconscious blockages that inhibit growth and the embodiment of these good qualities, which lie dormant in our psyche. Understanding that everyone carries a shadow helps us recognize the profound impact it has on our lives. Now, to provide you with an accurate description of the different types of shadows and how they influence us, we must start by understanding Carl Jung's concept of the psyche.
The ego is supposed to be the representative of the real person. And as I say, for instance, in the case where B knows of A, but A doesn't know of B, in that case, one would say the ego is more on the side of C. Because the ego has a more complete knowledge, and A is a split-off personality. You see, when I say self, then you mustn't think of I, myself, because that is only your empirical self, and that is covered by the term ego. But when it is matter of the self, then it is matter of a personality that is more complete than the ego, because the ego is only consists of what you are conscious of.
Jung therefore presents a distinction between the self and the ego. The ego represents our conscious identity, while the self is a more comprehensive and complete representation of our entire personality, including both conscious and unconscious elements.
Now that was a very serious thing to me, because what else then, you see? And I hated that fellow, and that was the only man I could have killed, you know. If I had met him once at a dark corner, I would have shown him something of what I could do.
Did you often have violent thoughts about people when you were young?
No, not exactly. Only when I got mad. Well, then I beat them up.
And did you often get mad?
Not so often, but then for good.
You were very strong and big, I imagine.
Yes, I was pretty strong. And you know, reared in the country with those peasant boys, it was a rough kind of life. And I would have been capable of violence, I know. I was a bit afraid of it. So I rather tried to avoid critical situations because I didn't trust myself. Once I was attacked by about 7 boys, and I got mad. And I took one and just swung him round with his legs, you know, and beat down 4 of them. And then they were satisfied.
Jung reflects on his own capacity for violence during his youth, acknowledging his intense emotions and physical abilities, but also his fear of losing control, which led him to avoid situations that could provoke violent behavior. This was his shadow. Now that we understand the basic concept of the shadow, let us delve deeper into Jung's model of the psyche.
I wonder if you would mind telling us a little bit about how you construe this term persona.
Well, this is a practical concept we need in elucidating people's relation. I noticed with my patients, particularly with people that are in public life, that they have a certain way of presenting themselves. So the persona is partially the result of the demands society has. And on the other side, it is a compromise with what one likes to be, or with what, or as one likes to appear. So the persona is a certain complicated system of behavior, which is partially dictated by society and partially dictated by the expectations or the wishes one nurses oneself.
Yes.
In Jung's model of the psyche, there are various personified structures that interact with one another within our inner world. 2 of these, the persona and the anima animus, are relational. The persona relates to the external world, while the anima animus relates to the internal world. The ego, which is primarily rooted in the body, can be understood as the executive part of the personality, existing alongside the shadow. Together, the ego and the shadow are central to our identity. The anima is the feminine aspect present in the unconscious of men, representing the inner feminine side and influencing their interactions with women and their emotional life. Its counterpart, the animus, is the masculine aspect present in the unconscious of women, representing the inner masculine side and influencing their interactions with men, as well as their assertiveness and reasoning. Now that we have introduced Jung's model of the psyche, let us move on to an in-depth analysis of the shadow. Specifically, Jung identifies 2 types of shadows, the personal shadow and the collective shadow. First, let us take a closer look at the personal shadow. This represents the dark side of our personality, what a person does not wish to be or does not recognize about themselves. It includes attributes and qualities of the ego that are little known or unknown, often perceived as weaknesses, socially unacceptable traits, or even as evil. In the collection of Jung's works, Volume 9, Part 2, Ion, Carl Jung states, "A closer examination of the dark characteristics, that is, the inferiorities constituting the shadow, reveals that they have an emotional nature, a certain autonomy, and consequently an obsessive or better, possessive quality. Failure to acknowledge and address our shadow can lead to significant problems. It is possible to be aware of one's shadow and partially conscious of it, meaning it is under some control of the ego. However, many people so completely reject the recognition of their shadow that the ego remains unaware of the shadow's behavior, leaving it with no possibility of control. Under these conditions, the shadow becomes autonomous and may express itself in the form of irritability and cruelty.
And so the psychical events are facts, are realities. And when you observe the stream of images within, you observe an aspect of the world within. Because the psyche, you know, if you understand it as a phenomenon that takes place in so-called living bodies, then it is a quality of matter. As our body consists of matter, we discovered that this matter has another aspect, namely a psychic aspect.
Now let us examine the positive aspects that emerge from observing our shadow. In Jung's book, Interviews and Encounters, we read, "When you observe the world, you see people, you see houses, you see the sky, you see tangible objects. But when you look inside yourself, you see moving images, a world of images generally known as fantasies. And yet, these fantasies are facts. It is a fact that a man has a certain fantasy, a fact so tangible that because of it, another man may lose his life or a bridge may be built. These houses were all fantasies. Everything you do here, all the houses, everything was a fantasy at first, and fantasy has its own reality. This must not be forgotten. Fantasy is not nothing. Of course, it is not a tangible object, but it is a fact." Jung also emphasizes that the unconscious is not merely a repository of forgotten or repressed thoughts. Instead, it is an active and powerful part of our psyche that significantly shapes our experiences and actions. This helps us understand that our inner world is just as real and influential as the external world we see around us. In his writings, Jung highlights the importance of developing awareness of the shadow in psychotherapy and of its projections in the individual's life. While the shadow is generally perceived as negative, it can also be positive. In fact, exploring our shadow grants us access to many positive qualities. Jung, in this excerpt from the collection of his works, Volume 9, Part 2, states, "The first of these is the shadow, that hidden, repressed personality, for the most part, inferior and burdened with guilt, whose ultimate ramifications reach back into the realm of our animal ancestors and thus encompass the whole historical aspect of the unconscious. If, up to now, it has been believed that the human shadow is the source of evil, it can now be determined with closer investigation that the unconscious man, that is, his shadow, not only consists of morally reprehensible tendencies, but also displays a number of good qualities, such as normal instincts, appropriate reactions, realistic insights, creative impulses, and so on."
Good, because man is not complete if he is not conscious of that aspect of things. So a man is not complete when he lives in a world of statistical truth. He must live in a world of his biological truth. That is his biological truth. That is not merely statistics. It is the expression of what he really is, as what he feels himself.
These explanations highlight Jung's views on the shadow and the self, emphasizing the importance of recognizing and integrating all aspects of our personality to achieve psychological wholeness. One of Jung's closest collaborators, Marie-Louise von Franz, writes in Man and His Symbols, Part 3, "The process of individuation, the realization of the shadow. The shadow is not necessarily always an opponent. In fact, it is exactly like any human being with whom one has to live, sometimes giving in, sometimes resisting, sometimes showing love depending on what the situation requires. The shadow becomes hostile only when it is ignored or misunderstood."
Well, in practical life they merge, but the personal shadow is the personal shortcomings of things which every human being could be conscious of, which is not archetypal and therefore not a mystery. For instance, such things as greed for money or jealousy. Jealousy is one of the main aspects of the shadow, or laziness, sloppiness, unrelatedness, sentimentality, and whatnot, inferiorities which everybody has, but prefers not to know about.
Marie-Louise von Franz and Carl Jung stress that recognizing, understanding, and integrating the shadow, a complex, emotional, and deeply personal part of our unconscious, is essential for achieving psychological wholeness and self-awareness. To better understand this, let's visualize the shadow. Imagine your shadow as a dark figure following you. At first, it seems intimidating, but when you turn to face it, you realize it's just a part of you that needs understanding and compassion. We also encounter our shadow in dreams, often as a person of the same sex as the dreamer. This figure acts as a critique of our character from the unconscious, an internal judge of our being that reprimands us, often leaving us in embarrassed silence. Let us now explore how to integrate the aspects of the shadow into our lives through dream analysis. For example, by familiarizing ourselves with the contents of the unconscious. This is called the process of shadow realization, also known as shadow work. Here begins the painful and lengthy task of self-education, which requires engaging in long and difficult negotiations with the shadow, a task that could be described as the psychological equivalent of the labors of Sisyphus. For those unfamiliar, the myth of Sisyphus tells of a man condemned by the gods to eternal punishment. He was forced to push a massive rock up a hill, only to see it roll back down each time it reached the top, trapping him in a cycle of endless suffering. Through shadow work, one can observe the shadow outwardly by monitoring emotional reactions and being radically honest in interactions with others, and inwardly by exploring one's dreams. In Carl Jung's collected works, Volume 13, Alchemical Studies, Jung states, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." However, this latter process is unpleasant and therefore unpopular. With a deeper understanding of our identity, it is now time to see the shadow in action. Understanding our shadow is crucial, but it doesn't have to be a daunting task. It can be a fascinating journey of self-discovery. This allows us to become enlightened and reduces the shadow's destructive potential, not by waging war on the darkness, so to speak, but by bringing darkness to light and light to darkness. From Jung's collected works, Volume 12, Psychology and Alchemy, we read, "There is no light without shadow, and no psychic wholeness without imperfection." As frightening or dark as facing our shadow may be, discovering the truth brings relief. The discernment of truth is the process of authenticity, a meticulous excavation into the depths of our being to explore possibilities and limitations, distortions, and the buried and often forgotten parts of ourselves and our abilities. However, most people are too lazy to deeply reflect even on the moral aspects of their behavior of which they are aware, let alone to consider how the unconscious influences them. Now that we have addressed and understood the personal shadow, let us explore the collective shadow. The shadow can also consist of factors that originate from sources external to the individual's personal life. In this case, we encounter the collective shadow, the dark side or the unknown and lesser-known aspects of a society and culture. It consists of what opposes our shared and collective values. To better understand this, let us take a closer look at the broader implications of the collective shadow.
There are, of course, great individual differences. There are individuals that have amazing knowledge of themselves, of the things that go on in themselves. But even those people wouldn't be capable of knowing what there is going on in their unconscious.
Yeah.
For instance, they are not conscious of the fact that while they live a conscious life, all the time a myth is played in the unconscious. A myth that extends over centuries.
Yes.
Namely, archetypal ideas, a stream of archetypal ideas that goes on through one individual, through the centuries.
Yes.
You see, it is like a continuous stream, and that comes into the daylight in the great movements.
Yeah.
Say in political movements or in spiritual movements. For instance, in the time before Reformation, people dreamt of the great change. And that's the reason why such great transformations could be predicted.
Yeah.
Somebody has been clever enough to see what there is going on in people's mind, in the unconscious mind,
Yeah.
would be able to predict it. For instance, I have predicted the Nazi rising in Germany through the observation of my German patients.
Yes.
They had dreams in which the whole thing was anticipated, and with considerable detail.
As is the nature of all shadow material, both individual and collective, its existence and influence can be pervasive without being obvious. The collective shadow manifests outwardly in atrocities, persecution, physical suffering, disease, poverty, malnutrition, alcoholism, crime, the death of cultures, and so on. It can also manifest more inwardly within the complexities of individual psyches, as self-hatred, disdain for one's heritage and culture, depression, and feelings of powerlessness, a desire for revenge, so others might experience a share of one's pain, and more. The collective shadow is what has historically been labeled as evil. In the Christian tradition, it would be the devil, and someone possessed by the devil loses their human qualities and acquires a demonic nature. For Jung, our primary response to evil must be the pursuit of self-knowledge and wholeness, which presupposes the assimilation of shadow material. The individual, Jung states, must ceaselessly know how much good they are capable of and what crimes they are capable of committing.
You know, every society has collective problems,
Yes.
collective convictions, and so on.
Yes.
Now, we are very much influenced by them.
Yeah.
For instance, you belong to a certain political party or
Yeah.
to a certain confession.
Yeah.
And that can be a serious determinant of your behavior.
Yeah.
Now, as long as your personal conflict doesn't touch upon it, it's no question, it doesn't appear. But the moment you transcend your personal sphere and come to your unpersonal determinants, say to the question, a political question, or any other social question, which really matters to you, then you are confronted with a collective problem, and then you have collective truths.
Yeah.
When an issue becomes apparent within a particular society, it can be defined as a shadow problem if there is evidence of denial, projection, and a lack of individual and collective accountability. Therefore, taking responsibility, morally, politically, and spiritually, is especially crucial. The courage with which we confront and carry our darkness frees others from having to carry it for us. For example, this can be seen in addressing the effects of massive historical suffering, wars, genocides, holocausts, pervasive oppression, and so on, whose effects continue to linger. As human beings, we have much to learn in this regard. Denial, often tied to the desire to move on and leave the past behind, seems to be the most common and usually the first reaction. There have been and continue to be many attempts to address difficult and painful pasts through public apologies for supporting atrocities, repentance, reparations after wars, pilgrimages to sites of great suffering, and so on. But how can we confront the past in a way that enables deep and widespread integration of the shadow within a population, rather than merely symbolic gestures by leaders or policies? Remembering and speaking about what often feels unspeakable is inevitably a painful process for victims and perpetrators, bystanders, and witnesses. Such a process can be considered successful or reasonably complete only once the pain, outrage, betrayal, suffering, and all other emotions have been expressed and heard, and once responsibility has been taken.
It is nowadays we are not threatened by elementary catastrophes. There is no such thing as an H-bomb. That is all man's doing.
Yeah.
We are the great danger. Psyche is the great danger. What if something goes wrong with the psyche?
Yeah.
And so you see, it is demonstrated to us in our days what the power of the psyche is of man, how important it is to know something about it, but we know nothing about it. nobody would give credit to the idea that the psychical processes of the ordinary man have any importance whatever.
Telling the truth is both the most desirable and the most feasible way to address a difficult past. A striking example of a terrible mass psychosis embodied by the collective shadow is Nazi Germany, where individuals succumbed to a demonic nature through their personal shadow. They joined the Nazi Party and committed acts far worse than they could have ever imagined or would have done under normal social conditions. In this sense, the personal shadow is the bridge to the collective shadow. Therefore, it is crucial to resolve one's own internal conflicts, the personal shadow first, to avoid unconsciously falling into the collective shadow. By doing so, one can influence others positively, benefiting society as a whole. In summary, we must first acknowledge our personal shadow and engage in long and difficult negotiations with it, being honest with ourselves and in our interactions with others, observing our emotional reactions and exploring our dreams. This prevents us from becoming passive victims of our shadow and unconscious projections, allowing us to salvage the dormant positive qualities within us and improve both our lives and the lives of those around us. The courage to carry our darkness brings relief to others, as telling the truth is the most desirable way to confront a difficult past. Ignoring atrocities only allows the shadow to grow until it can grow no further, and history, inevitably, repeats itself. And what do you think about Jung's concept of the shadow? Let us know in the comments section. If you enjoyed this documentary, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Also, I highly recommend watching the documentary on synchronicities, which will appear shortly. In the meantime, thank you for following us, and see you soon.